Today I'm going to start with a question. What does it mean to know something? Now, obviously, this is a question that's been debated by philosophers east and west from the beginning of philosophy. But we're going to look at it in terms of the interesting process of how do you translate a word from Japanese, particularly medieval Japanese, into modern English, and how do you understand the meaning of it. And we're going to use a short passage from the famous Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, which has come out in half a dozen or more editions. And it's very interesting to read them in parallel because you see different authors will take different takes on the original. Some of them are actually maybe paraphrasing English books that they've read and rewriting in their own with their own interpretation. Others are quite expert in looking at the original, and the original, by the way, is not even that easy to understand by modern Japanese because it was written in 1645, and so you can imagine someone trying to interpret English literature written around that time into modern terms. It's not that easy. But anyway, that being said, this is a great book, and it's worth study whether or not you actually practice the sword as a great book of philosophy and on life. So what I'm going to do is take a section from the first part of the water book, Mizunomaki, or the water scroll, I should say. And we're going to start with one of the earlier translations. It was called A Book of Five Rings, The Classic Guide to Strategy. And I think it was first issued in 1974, but then it made a huge comeback in the 80s and was a bestseller, New York Times bestseller, and in fact they have this all over the cover. Japan's answer to the Harvard MBA. On Wall Street, when Musashi talks, people listen. That was Time Magazine's quote. Anyway, so that's partly in the context, but I think it was probably still used the original writings of Victor Harris, who himself was an expert on the Japanese sword. He was the president of the Tolkien, or Sword Society of Great Britain. He was the head of the Japanese Department of the British Museum, and it came out in 1982 edition anyway by the Overlook Press. So he certainly knows what he's talking about. But let's listen to his. First of all, there are two phrases that I want to begin. The title and then the first paragraph. The title of the section, the first paragraph, and particularly the last sentence. I'll just read it and give you an idea what it says, and then we'll compare the other translations. So, according to Victor Harris, Musashi said, spiritual bearing in strategy. In strategy, your spiritual bearing must not be any different from normal. Both in fighting and in everyday life, you should be determined through calm. Meet the situation without tenseness, yet not recklessly, your spirit settled, yet unbiased. Even when your spirit is calm, do not let your body relax, and when your body is relaxed, do not let your spirit slacken. Do not let your spirit be influenced by your body, or your body be influenced by your spirit. Be neither insufficiently spirited nor over-spirited. An elevated spirit is weak, and a low spirit is weak. Do not let the enemy see your spirit. So the ending sentence there is, do not let the enemy see your spirit, and the title of it is Spiritual Bearing and Strategy. Now, there are other translations. If you bear with me, I'll go over some of those. For example, the book called The Complete Book of Five Rings, edited, this in case not translated, but edited by Kenji Tokitsu, who I believe is a karate sensei. And it's the annotated version, so it has a lot of his excellent notes. He, being a karate master himself, is published by the Shambhala Press. And he calls this first part the state of mind in strategy, not the bearing of the spirit, but state of mind. And again, the translation of his reads, in the way of strategy, one's state of mind need not be distinct from the ordinary one. In daily life as well as in strategy, it is necessary to have an ample and broad mind and to carefully keep it very straight, not too tight and not at all loose, in order not to have your mind too much off to one side It is necessary to place it in the center and move it calmly so that it does not cease to move even in the moments of change. All that has to be examined well. So here again, the key phrases to focus on are the title, state of mind and strategy, and the ending sentence, all that has to be examined well. And we'll look at what the original Japanese for that is at the end of comparing these translations. A third translation is from the book called Complete Musashi, the Book of Five Rings and Other Works, by Tuttle Press. It was translated by Alexander Bennett, who's a New Zealand kendo master and very well known in Japan today. Teaches at a university and appears in many documentaries. Very articulate person. And his translation begins with called About the Mindset of Combat. The mindset in the way of combat must be no different from one's normal state of mind. In the course of your daily life and when engaged in strategy, there should be no change whatsoever in your outlook. Your mind should be expansive and direct, devoid of tension, but not at all casual. Keeping your mind centered, not leaning too much to one side, swaying serenely and freely so that it does not come to a standstill in moments of change. Consider this carefully. So again, About the Mindset of Combat is the subtitle, and consider this carefully is the ending phrase that we're going to look at in Japanese at the end. So again, very well-respected and articulate people who have a lot of experience in some cases actually with the martial arts. Another book was done, the English translation by, the book is called The Book of Five Rings. It's a pretty direct translation of Gein no Sho. And the English translation is by William Scott Wilson, who the American Literary Translators Association called today's foremost translator of samurai texts. So highly regarded as a translator. I'm not sure about his martial arts background, but anyway, in terms of translating literature and martial arts texts, he is considered to be perhaps the best. Again, his translation starts, the title of the same section is The Frame of Mind for the Martial Arts. In the way of the martial arts, do not let your frame of mind be any different from your everyday life. In both everyday and military events, your mind should not change in the least, but should be broad and straightforward, neither drawn too tight nor allowed to slacken even a little. Keep the mind in the exact center, not allowing it to become sidetracked. Let it sway peacefully, not allowing it to stop doing so for even a moment. You should investigate these things thoroughly. So again, the frame of mind for the martial arts is the subtitle, and the ending of this paragraph, the ending phrase is, you should investigate these things thoroughly. You start to see some of the challenge of that translators face, because almost any one of these adjectives and many of the nouns can actually be written in other ways. And I should also make mention of a very important book by a good friend of mine named Sean Michael Wilson. He is not related, I believe, to William Scott Wilson, but William Scott Wilson evidently thought highly enough of Sean Michael Wilson's The Book of Five Rings, a graphic novel, which is a collaboration with a manga artist, and then Sean adapted William Scott Wilson's translation to make the story, and it's quite engaging because it's in a manga form. It's quite readable, but it's also quite deep. And although this is not the translation of the same passage, because I think it was abbreviated. Oh no, I found it. Okay, it says, in the way of the martial arts, do not let your frame of mind be any different from your everyday mind. In both everyday and military events, your mind should not change in the least, but should be broad and straightforward, neither drawn too tight nor allowed to slacken even a little. Keep your mind in the exact center, not allowing it to become sidetracked. Let it sway peacefully, not allowing it to stop doing so for even a moment. You should investigate these things thoroughly. And, of course, this is based on or comes from William Scott Wilson's text, but the part that Sean himself wrote and again, this is highlighted in the manga text. It's very interesting because in the Book of Water, he begins with Musashi ruminating in the cave and by the river, saying writing things such as, "You should deeply consider what is written in this book. If you think about it indifferently, you are likely to diverge from the way." That's deep, isn't it? You should deeply consider what is written in this book. If you think about it indifferently, you are likely to diverge from the way. However, you will not reach the essence of the martial arts by merely looking at this book. Musashi is then talking about his own book, in fact. Rather, you should consider these principles as though they were discovered from your own mind and continually make great efforts to make them a physical part of yourself. Now, I really like this. I believe it's Sean's original phrase. If he were to read it, you'd hear it in a Scottish accent, but I'll speak in my American tongue and just read it again. Rather, you should consider these principles as though they were discovered from your own mind and continually make great efforts to make them a physical part of yourself. So yeah, I really like that. And the reason is that you can see from the comparison of the books and the translations that are done in different eras, and maybe, I don't know if the editors are modifying these based on what they think will sell. I doubt it. That's mostly on the front cover and maybe a title. But anyway, you've got these experts all speaking about different things, and we go back to the title of the paragraph, which is either a mindset or a frame of mind or a spirit of strategy, state of mind and strategy, all these different ways of describing it in the translations. But in the Japanese, in the original Japanese, the word is kokoromochi, for heiho, which is combat or military or martial situations. And so, but kokoromochi means literally the way you hold your mind. So you might think of it as a feeling, a mood, a sensation, a disposition, well, essentially a mental attitude, state of mind. Yeah, those are all pretty good. State of spirit, mental bearing, all those I think are pretty close to the original, although it's sometimes hard to know what people meant writing that long ago when you can't ask them directly. But the key point that I want to focus on here, which is what Sean translates so well in his graphic novel, or has Musashi saying and speaking for him, is the ending part where people, some translations say, consider this carefully. All that has to be examined well. In one case, yes, it wasn't even translated at all. And then, let's see, the other one, it was, you should investigate these things thoroughly. Now, so the word that we're looking at is consider, investigate, think deeply. And I think, sadly, most of those words actually are far short of the mark of the original Japanese that Musashi used. The word he used was called ginmi. And fair enough, if you translate ginmi, the two characters, looking at a Japanese English dictionary, it will say close examination, careful selection, testing, or scrutiny. So in that sense, it's not wrong. However, being a calligrapher and being fascinated by the etymology of kanji, because I think they contain a lot of the original meaning, I like to think of this as from the etymology. So the gin is a picture of a radical of the mouth next to the radical meaning the present moment, and together they mean to sing or chant. To sing or chant, and literally the two the characters' parts would mean now in the mouth or currently being spoken, or maybe it was meant to be spoken aloud or to be issued from your spirit, as Sean says, that it comes from your own mind. So that's gin. And then mi is also means taste. Aji is another pronunciation. And that character is really interesting because it means not yet in the mouth. So you have the character for mouth and then the radical for not yet. So this is fascinating because if it's not yet in your mouth, then you can still, if you even think about a lemon, your mouth will start to water. So maybe it's the process of thinking deeply about it which causes you literally to salivate over this samurai philosophy, in a sense. But I think if you think of it that way, that what Musashi actually said is in fact very difficult to translate, and if you went into all the nuances, you'd never get through the entire book, because this is just a single phrase, but it appears over and over again throughout the Book of Five Rings, and therefore I think it's important to consider what does it really mean. So back to the question that I started with at the beginning, what was Musashi actually saying? You can listen to this again if you want to, and consider the translations. Perhaps you have the book on your bookshelf in the first part of the Water Scroll, the Book of Water. You can find it. But what did Musashi mean, and what did he mean for the readers of his book then, and what does it mean for us now? And I think if you do consider that deeply, you will find that, yes, indeed, you begin to utter things that come from your soul. And yes, indeed, you will begin to salivate over the samurai philosophy.